Want to thank you very much for letting me give my 20th podcast here at Jesus Social Hour in reference to Romans7.org. Please look at our webpage about helping people. This is going to be the 27th book of the Bible, the Old Testament, the book of Daniel, which is probably one of the most important books in the Old Testament because God is directly talking to Daniel. So we're hearing Daniel's voice. The book of Daniel, it's speculation, either here nor there. Either was written by Daniel or his influence or any authors who wrote the book of Daniel. They were using a real figure, a real person, Daniel, and the time frame he lived through was 538 BC, and would have been him being brought out of as a child and his three friends out of Jerusalem when it was sacked by King Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon, and brought to Babylon. And it all belongs to the style of apocalyptic. And basically this is doomsday type prophecy. When Daniel was born, some of the Jewish researchers think that he grew up in a religious family and he had a religious background. Obviously, King Nebuchadnezzar only wanted high-profile, high-educated, high-blessed children also to be brought to the royal palace in Babylon. And during the captivity into Babylon, there was a king called Antiochus, number 4, and he reigned between 167 and 164 BC. And he had bitter prosecution against the Jews in Babylonia. And he had a name, Ephelia, and it was called God on Earth as a title. That's how he viewed himself, very evil man. And so people are looking, the Jews were looking for a message, and Daniel definitely was it. Daniel was wise. Daniel had 3 companions, 3 friends. So we're looking at, Daniel and his 3 friends. And the moral of the story is men of faith can resist temptation, conquer adversity, and fear that a persecuted Jew of the 200, 300, type 500 BC could see applications of their stories to their own life. And in the book of Daniel, 7th chapter, they talk again. Jeremiah is all the same thing. The arrival of new kingdom, the Son of Man, Jesus. And we see in the 8th chapter, verse 16, Gabriel, the angel, God came, called down to earth and told Daniel, listen to my angel Gabriel. This is the first time that Gabriel's name is mentioned in the Bible, which is very, very important, because Gabriel was one of the first people that talked to the Virgin Mary and told her that she will have a son, and of course that's Jesus. So Gabriel is important. This is the first time we hear his name. The 70-year captivity in Jeremiah prophet, it gave the timeline of exile complete passing of the current generation. That's how they figured, the 70 years to get rid of the old and bring in the new. And the prophecy that Daniel had by God, it was just incredible. But on this time frame of 538 BC, 200 years later, 333 BC, in the prophecy was Greece under Alexander the Great would take out the Persian Empire by his victory of Issus, I-S-S-U-S, in 333 BC. Now that's important on the prophecies because here we're in the 6th century BC and this is in the 4th century BC. So we're seeing a prophecy 200 years later. Only God can do that. And these messages to prophets like Daniel, they're called watchmen, and they are speaking for God. The key stories in the book of Daniel is Daniel interpreting the dreams of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. And the second story is a fiery furnace. The third story is the lion's den. And we see the faithfulness, the divine protection, triumph in God's people over adversity. And which is incredible is that Daniel, in his captivity in Babylon, he outlived the Babylonian Empire. And he was there seeing the Persian Cyrus the Great come in 538. So Daniel was a live figure in history, and he's seen the history unfold in front of him. In fact, he predicted through God, of course, the fall of the Babylonian Empire. The book of Daniel is made up of two halves. The first half is the story of Daniel and his three friends, and their names are Shadrach and Meshach, and the third friend is Abednego. And the second half is confirming the apostolic visions, which are designed to reassure God's people in spite of the present persecution and suffering. And there again, this is under the mean king US4 that I mentioned earlier, that God is in control and ultimately you will be victorious. In writings, that's what Daniel is pretty well foretold in the book. It foretells catastrophic events, the ultimate fate of the world, characterized by supernatural revelations, focus on the final judgment and establishment of a new order. And the book of Daniel shares many, many features of the book of Revelation, and is full of people taken up to heaven, return to earth with the messages. 8 cathartic writers, despairs of the present and directs his hopes to the future, a new world order, standing in its essential opposition to the present, and the message to the rulers in Babylon, Egypt, Syria, Greece, if you will, Rome, if you will. And probably more important as you build up to the present day is the message that the rulers will become more corrupt, more unreasonable, and they will grow in strength of each succeeding age in their meanness and apathy and their torture, till at last the final ruler, which will be Satan, is conceived as the ruler of the world. And then at the end, book of Revelation, then Jesus comes down in a whirlwind and sets up, the earth as his new world order. And as we look at the passages in the book of Daniel, and there's about probably 7, 8 of them I'll quote here. God, he changes the times, the seasons. He removes kings, settles up with the kings, gives wisdom to wise, knowledge to know, and understanding. And the furnace, he sent 3 friends of Daniel in there, and temperature is insane. And then they see 4 different figures in the furnace room, and the one is an angel of God, of Jesus. Then we see Daniel, the lion's den. Then God sent an angel there to shut the lion's mouth. And then I mentioned earlier the forecast of 200 years later that Greece will conquer Persia, and Persia currently is being conquered is conquering Babylonia. And many will be purified, made with white, tried, and the wicked shall be wicked, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall have understanding. And standing in the lot by himself into the day, Daniel was there, Persian, Cyprus the Great. Daniel prophesied Alexander the Great. Daniel's three friends were exiled as children with Daniel to Babylon. Then wisdom is understanding and knowledge of that understanding. And that is what is so important for me to learn, is that wisdom and understanding, and there's knowledge of that understanding when you seek and find wisdom. Then we see after Nebuchadnezzar, there's a feast. He has his grandson who's now king, Belshazzar, in 539 BC. He has a feast and he orders all the plates of gold, goblets to be bringing out of the ransacking of Jerusalem when they carried everything to Babylon. And then on the wall where they're having the feast is an inscription, a miraculous inscription. Then Daniel was ordered to come in and give knowledge of what the inscription meant. And to that new king, that meant that he would be overthrown. Persian, Darius the Mede would take over. Then that night, that new king died, prophesied by Daniel. And there again, a voice in heaven, this is Gabriel, my servant, hear him, to Daniel. And God named Gabriel. And the book of Daniel was historical writing, real prophet. Daniel as a watchman. He gave future kings, Babylonian, Greece, Persian, Egypt, all, their beginnings and their end. And Daniel was a religious Jew, paid strict dietary observance to food, wine, restrictions. And he moved freely without fear. He entered the furnace. His friends entered the furnace, actually, in the fourth figure, walking around, protect them from the fumes. And then Daniel entering the lion cage, and then the angel appears and shuts the lion's mouth. And Jeremiah the prophet, 30 years captivity, New Jerusalem. So the book of Daniel was hope, communicating about the destruction of the present kings and about the new world order. And it's so important is that we look at, we see, and that we realize that God is in control. And Jesus has always been talked again about the new world order. And the Israel people are favorites of God, and he keeps forgiving them for all their gracious sin. And he keeps giving new prophets and telling them that things will change again and change again and change again. And then he uses the 70-year time frame to erase the previous blasphemous type. People were there and give them another shot and another shot and another shot to be purified. And you can't be purified without Jesus, leading the way. That's why we're so blessed to have Jesus and knowledge of Jesus in this crazy world that we live in. I want to thank you very much for letting me give this exciting book of the Bible. And next week, we're going to have book 28, Hosea, 29, Joel, and book 30, Amos, 3 prophets of God. And we'll get them all in the 21st broadcast. And then, but please look at our webpage and examine it, romans7.org. And please email and give me encouragement. And as we get to the end of the Old Testament, get to the New Testament, on the New Testament will be a new broadcast. We'll make it live and for people to email and join it. So I want to thank you very much. It was a pleasure to give this podcast, and I'll see you next week.